Welcome, welcome, sir. Please. A very good afternoon to you all, and welcome to the official opening session of the Water Security and Climate Change Conference 2022. My name is Victor Shinde. I'm from the National Institute of Urban Affairs in India. My colleague Alestina Shrestha, who was the MC in the morning, and I are going to be the MCs for this session. We are thrilled and honored to have with us a highly accomplished panel of dignitaries with us today for this opening session. We have with us the Honorable Minister of Natural Resources and Environment of Thailand, His Excellency Mr. Varawut Silpa Acha. We have the Ambassador of Germany in Thailand, His Excellency Mr. George Schmidt. We have the Deputy Chief of Mission and the Minister at the Embassy of Japan in Thailand, His Excellency Mr. Yuichi Oba. We have the Chief of the Water Sector Group at the Asian Development Bank, Ms. Nita Pokhrel. We have the Vice Chair of AIT Board of Trustees, Dr. Suwit Kunkiti. We also have the President of the AIT of the Asian Institute of Technology, Professor Kazuo Yamamoto. And finally, we have the Chair of the Scientific and Organizing Committees of WSCC 2022, Professor Mukund Babel. So to initiate the proceedings of this session, may I now invite to the stage Dr. Suwit Kunkiti, Vice Chair of the AIT Board of Trustees, to deliver the welcome address. Sir, please.
Honorable Minister of Natural Resources and Environment, His Excellency Varawut Silpa Acha. I have the honor to serve under his father when he was Prime Minister, Banhan Silpa Acha. I was the Minister of Agriculture and Cooperative then. Ambassador of Germany to Thailand, His Excellency George Schmidt, Deputy Chief of Mission, Minister of Economic Affairs of the Embassy of Japan in Thailand, Mr. Yuichi Oba, Chief of Water Sector Group at ADB, Ms. Nita Pokhrel, President of Asian Institute of Technology, Professor Kazuo Yamamoto, Chair of the WSCC 2022 Organizing Committee, Professor Mukund Babel. He's somewhere here. Oh, over there. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants. On behalf of the Asian Institute of Technology, or AIT, it's given me an immense pleasure to welcome you all to this conference on water security and climate change. This conference could not have come at a better time. The deliberations in COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh last month, which Minister just came back from Sharm el-Sheikh, so he have lots of issues to tell us about, I hope. Made it amply clear that water is a central element of the climate agenda. As more and more countries and regions are facing the negative consequences of climate change related to water resources. This aspect was also highlighted in the 6th IPCC assessment report that was released last year. The message is clear. Unless adequate action is taken in the water sector, we will not be able to combat climate change. The greatest challenge of our time, I think this is very important. As our countries prepare to take more ambitious actions in this regard, conferences such as these are very important to improve our shared understanding of how to proceed ahead and address the challenges. I'm told that today there are more than 250 experts from 34 countries gathered in this place with such a rich wealth of scientific acumen spanning different geographies. I'm certain that the deliberation of this conference will facilitate excellent cross-learning, which will help in the larger response to climate change in our respective regions. I have no doubt that this conference will trigger insightful scientific discussion on diverse aspects of water and climate as reflected in the conference agenda. However, I would encourage the organizers to push the envelope further by making the deliberations of this conference also useful and relevant for practitioners, decision makers, and policy makers. Therefore, in addition to all scientific publications planned from the proceedings of the conference, I urge you to also produce a policy briefing highlighting action points that decision makers should be aware of and describe the possible avenues of how these actions can be achieved. It is a great honor for AIT to be part of this community of leading water and climate change professionals across the world. Since our establishment in 1959, our mandate of AIT has been to infuse scientific thinking for solving some of the most pressing challenges in Asia and beyond. We are doing that with climate changes as well. AIT has positioned itself at high in this area through research, education, and outreach. We promise to work shoulder to shoulder with partners across the world to plug scientific and capacity gaps related to water management in light of climate change. I wish you all a very productive and insightful conference, and have a pleasant stay in Thailand. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Khunpriti, for your remarks. I would now like to invite Professor Mukund Babel, Chair of Scientific and Organizing Committees of WSCC 2022, to please come and provide a brief overview of the conference.
Good afternoon, Excellencies. The Minister of Natural Resource and Environment, Kun Warawut, His Excellency the Ambassador of Germany to Thailand, Deputy Chief of Mission at Embassy of Japan, Dr. Suvit of Board of Trustees of AIT, Nita Pokhrel, the Chair of Water Sector at ADB. It's my pleasure to give you an overview of this conference. So actually the philosophy behind this particular conference, when we envisaged in 2015 and 16 was to bring in something which brings the two communities, water and climate communities, together, because we believe that water is the first sector which is affected by climate, but at the same time, water could also be the way, an entry point for developing resilience of society and our ecosystems. We would like to have these four broad themes of this particular philosophy. One is, we would like to move beyond science. So this conference is not only an academic conference, but it links to the development. And development means the policy and practitioners. The second point is that we would like to mainstream this interdisciplinary thinking, not only in education, but in research and implementation. And the third point is, we'd like to create an environment which makes the decision making useful for the society. And that brings the transdisciplinary approach to research and education. But fourth and most important, and equally important, is leaving no one behind. So these are the four kind of philosophical ideas we had when we started with this conference. So our journey, as I said earlier, started in 2016. The first conference, the first edition was here in AIT. Then we were in Germany, then Kenya, to Mexico, to Vietnam, and Thailand, and this is how our journey was last 6-7 years. This year, linking it to COP26 and COP27, we decided to have the focus area on adaptation for sustainable and resilient development. And three themes which we define for this conference. First is on transitioning from sectorial thinking to nexus thinking. How do we go away from sectoral thinking? Number two, on robustifying climate change adaptation strategies. And number three, which is very important from science, how do you translate those knowledge into action? With that, I would like to give you an overview of the conference in terms of participation. We have 270 plus participants across 34 countries, and about 34% or 37% are female. More importantly, they are coming from all six continents. And in all, about 150 researches will be presented in 3 days. And I made a calculation that each research would need about 6 months. That means 3 days are equal to 75 years of work. So 3 days, 75 years of work is presented. And as we are talking about SDGs, and this conference is trying to address 3 SDGs directly, 4 another in peripheral, and another remaining 9 indirectly. So this is how I define this conference. We got overwhelming responses to our approach, our requests to various partners. And I'm happy to inform the audience here that we have almost 50 organizations directly, indirectly taking part in this conference. And AIT is proud of hosting this for the second time in the series. Thank you very much. But before that, I also would like to take half a minute to kind of acknowledge the support which has come from government of Germany through DAAD. We have also received support from Asian Development Bank. We have also received support from APN, Asia Pacific Network for Global Change Research, and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and also from private sector. The Panya Consultant Company generously supported this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Mukund Babil, for the succinct overview of the conference. I am now pleased to invite the Deputy Chief of Mission and Minister at the Embassy of Japan in Thailand, His Excellency Mr. Yuichi Oba, to deliver his remarks.
Good afternoon. His Excellency Mr. Vanuat Silpa Acha, Minister of Natural Resources and Environment, Dr. Suvit Kunkiti, Vice Chairperson of the AIT Board of Trustees, Professor Kazuo Yamamoto, Interim President of AIT, His Excellency Mr. Georg Schmidt, Ambassador of Germany, distinct participants. It is my great pleasure to be here today at the opening session of the Water Security and the Climate Change Conference 2022. I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to the Asian Institute of Technology and the co-organizers for their efforts to convene this important and timely conference just after COP27 was over, and to take this opportunity to talk about Japan's policy efforts to promote international cooperation in areas related to this conference agenda. This year has indeed been marked by extreme weather events such as floods and droughts, which many scientists have linked in part to climate change. Japan has been at the forefront of battling with water-related natural disasters over many centuries and continues to experience increasing incidents of floods with recent rises in temperatures. Acknowledging the seriousness of this issue, in April this year, Japan hosted the 4th Asia-Pacific Water Summit in Kumamoto Prefecture. About 5,500 people from 30 countries, including 18 heads of state, practitioners, researchers, and civil society and private sector representatives participated in this summit. At this summit, participants reaffirmed the importance of placing water at the center of the policy agenda, particularly as the Asia-Pacific region is the most prone to water disasters in the world. They also recognize that climate change will continue to generate multi-hazards of cyclones, floods, and droughts, complicating the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. Participants are confirmed to take measures to manage water resources more effectively, improving water security and access to water and sanitation as a public health measure to fight against infectious diseases. As a sign of commitment to this aim, Prime Minister Kishida announced a pledge of approximately 500 billion Japanese yen over the next 5 years under the Kumamoto Water Initiative. Leveraging our experience in handling issues related to water and technology, we will continue to share our expertise and knowledge with other countries in the Asia-Pacific region, especially from the perspectives of finance and governance, including capacity related to policies, human resources, and science and technology. All of these efforts are to be in alignment with Japan's effort to become a leader in achieving carbon neutrality by 2050 and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Under the Kumamoto Initiative, Japan will promote climate change mitigation measures in conjunction with adaptation measures for disaster risk reduction and infrastructure development as part of our multi-hazard response. These efforts should leverage digital quality infrastructure, which should serve also as an engine for economic growth. Our international cooperation commitment of $70 billion for climate change from public and private sources should assist toward this end. Finally, I'd like to close my remarks by wishing you a productive discussion and expressing my great hopes that AIT, its graduates, and faculty will play a large role in this increasingly important field. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oba. I would now like to invite the Ambassador of Germany to Thailand, His Excellency Mr. George Smith, to deliver his remarks.
Sawadee Krap, good afternoon. Minister, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, coming from all over the world to beautiful Thailand, welcome here. In Thailand, but not only in Thailand, climate change has been all over the headlines recently. We just finished the APEC summit here, and in the declaration, if you look at it, you have talks about the Bangkok goals, you have a lot about biocircular green economy, and what I find fascinating in this country is to see how many leaders from business and industries have picked up climate change not as something that they say, oh no, it's another extra cost factor, because it is a cost factor if you change your way how to do business, but also more and more people realize that it's a business case, and it's a business case to be made. And I think this is a very positive development, because unless we have the private sector on board, we will not get as far somewhere as we need to get. Also, many people talked about the COP27. I was not there, so I'm speaking under the control of the minister. But I would say it underlines again that we have to do things in a multilateral way. Many skeptics say, why these big gatherings? Why do you do that? Isn't it too slow and you're just talking and talking and talking? But unless we have these meetings, this is something that concerns everybody, and everybody from different perspectives. And they are, I think, crucial to collect government to government, but also business to business, civil societies, communes, and to see where we are, and to have stock taking, or to try at least to take as many people along this road as possible. If I sometimes think, like, if we look at the planet Earth from the outside, if we were aliens flying in here, and I say, look, these guys, they're hitting a very difficult situation, and they're still squabbling about this and that, and it's not easy, because climate change looks very different if you sit on an island in the Pacific, and when you say the predictions come through, then 10 years from now we'll all have to move. Or from another country that might say, oh, we profit from it even because things are changing are changing. So we need to have all these perspectives on board. And I'm at least, it's good that we had so many tensions, also political tensions, and despite the Russian war in Ukraine, that we managed to have an agreement. It's probably many people wanted to have more, but there was at least not a complete breakdown. And I think it's a very good sign also that governments in the People's Republic of China and governments of the United States are talking again, despite all the other political tensions. Because it's climate change, it's too important. It's too important not to talk about it, and it concerns all of us. There have been mixed reports. We had some positive developments. As I said, like from a German perspective, we would have liked to have a stronger focus also on the 1.5 degrees. So yes, we had loss and damage as something new, but we're still arguing about how to finance, how to go along. But I think it's crucial that we don't lose track of 1.5 degrees. And yet, at the same time, I'm standing here as the German ambassador, and for instance, the energy crisis in Germany now has forced us to take a choice which was not a comfortable choice, especially not for a green government, to actually refire coal stations. So we have to understand also if we take these choices, because for short-term interest, we have to be tolerant also of others who take these choices for short-term interests. And that's why these meetings, I think, are so important. And there is a strong commitment still from Germany to go for the energy transition, to abandon fossil fuels. The German word Energiewende, I think, is quite well known, at least in these circles. But here we're sitting together to talk about climate change and food and water security. I think the link is very clear. We can't live without food, we can't live without water. I think the talk about water wars has been around for a long, long time. And I remember when I was a younger diplomat, very often you think about it in terms of like very dry and arid areas. And the last summer this year, brought back home the message also to Central Europe. What happens if the water levels in your rivers go down that way? And for instance, it affected, with the River Rhine, it affected Germany a lot. Shipping, a lot of our shipping is done on the waterways. It affects people who actually use the water for cooling. If people say, oh, let's go nuclear, but many nuclear power plants need the cooling water from the rivers. And it affected hugely agriculture. And I'm not seeing that we're going to war for water again in Europe soon, but it rammed home something, the message also in Germany at least, very clear that this is not something that's happening far away and you read about it and you flip the page and you go and read something nice about the Football World Cup, or maybe not so nice. But it brought back home the message that, look, this is something that's of immediate concern to us as well. Germany, from a foreign policy point of view, we have been talking about this nexus between climate change and security over the last years, including also when we were non-permanent member in the Security Council in 2019 and 20. There's the annual Berlin Climate and Security Conference also, and there's a lot of effort in trying to at least predict, for instance, using AI tools to predict where the next crisis might erupt. So if we have better understandings about it, it gives policymakers a much better argument. And I think we need to convince as policymakers our publics also, why do we spend this money on here? And if we can scientifically say, if you spend the amount A money today to avoid what is happening in the future, that is very helpful. I sometimes jokingly say that's the job also of diplomats, to make journalists less successful. Like every crisis diffused is a crisis that is not good for the press. So a meeting on water security and climate change is important. We were mentioned before. I'm speaking under here as a main sponsor also via the German Academic Exchange Service. There are 4 types, actually the DAAD, the German Academic Exchange Service, set up 4 global centers for climate and environment, and one of these centers is the Global Water and Climate Adaptation Center that's also involved in the organization of this very conference through the Bangkok-based Asian Institute of Technology. And it's my year number 5 here in Thailand, and we had often discussions with the AIT. I respect a lot your work. I think you're doing so much behind the scenes in bringing expertise together in many fields, so my respect for and my gratitude for the AIT in this space. And it's also good to see so many universities involved, researchers from Germany, but also from all over the place. That's extremely helpful. It helps us to get a better picture. So again, a big thank you to all the colleagues for the hard works to get us all together here in this conference. I wish us all, or you all, 3 fruitful days, or as was said before, 3 days which pack in 75 years of research. What a time-efficient way to spend your time. Thank you very much. Khop kun mak krab.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith, for your remarks. It is now time for the keynote address of this session. It is with great pleasure that I invite the Honorable Minister of Natural Resources and Environment of Thailand, His Excellency, Mr. Waravut Shilpa Archa, to the podium.
Excellency Dr. Suvit Kunkiti, the Vice Chairperson of the AIT Board of Trustees, Excellencies Mr. Kirk Schmidt, the Ambassador of Germany to Thailand, Mr. Yuichi Oba, Deputy Chief of Mission to the Embassy of Japan, Professor Kazuo Yamamoto, the Interim President of AIT, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon and swadee krap. Well, I really hate speaking after lunch because everyone tends to agree with me because everyone just nod, Yes or no, everyone will just nod. But nonetheless, it's a pleasure to be here joining under the Water Security and Climate Change Conference, focusing on the adaptation for sustainable and resilient development. Now, to start with, I'd like to take this opportunity to express my sincere appreciation to the Asian Institute of Technology, AIT, and partners for organizing this conference, which is a very, very wonderful opportunity in proliferating the exchange of knowledge and practical know-how on the intrinsic relationship between water security and climate change among sectors, which including scholars, policymakers, practitioners around the whole world. And all of us gathering here this afternoon know very well that water is life, and humanity demand for water is growing and growing each year. And the pressure on water resources is increasing due to overuse, pollution, and of course climate change, which would certainly reduce the amount of renewable surface water and groundwater resources. Droughts and heat waves are becoming more and more intense and more frequent. Sea level rise is also driving saltwater intrusion, resulted in the unappropriated quality of water for agriculture as well as human consumption. Now, according to WMO's State of Climate Service 2021, more than 20% of the world's river basins have experienced either rapid increase or declines in their surface water area. Now, flood-related disasters have multiplied by 134% during the last 2 decades. The number of duration of droughts have also increased by 29%. And furthermore, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC's, the 6th assessment report indicates that the continued warming will certainly intensify the global water cycle, including its variability, global monsoon precipitation, and severity of wet and dry events. And opportunities for adaptation to many climate risks would likely become constrained, as capacity for adaptation in many locations is already significantly limited. And therefore, adaptation is in need more of an obligation than a choice. It's not a choice for us to do or not to do. And the 26th session of the Conference of Parties of the UNFCCC COP26 last year in Glasgow made it abundantly clear that not only mitigation through controlling the global temperature at 1.5 degrees Celsius, but also the adaptation is ambitious to all parties. Active adaptation strategies at multiple spatial and temporal scales are also required. Now, at COP27 that I went to last month, the parties determined a way forward with significant progress on adaptation, particularly on the global goal on adaptation, which will be concluded hopefully by next year in COP28 in Dubai. The new pledges, totaling more than $230 million, were additionally made to Adaptation Fund, which expectantly will assist many more vulnerable communities adapt to climate change through the concrete adaptation solutions. The Sharm el-Sheikh Adaptation Agenda, which is certainly a comprehensive shared agenda to rally global action to address the adaptation gap and achieve a resilient world by building climate resilient for 4 billion vulnerable people by 2030. It was also launched. The adaptation agenda outlines multiple actions which will apply nature-based solutions to improve water security and livelihoods. The overall progress will be reported back to COP28. Now, ladies and gentlemen, COP27 may be over, but the fight for a safe future is way, way from over. The interconnected water security and climate crisis are right now affecting all of us as we speak, particularly the frontline communities that are so, so vulnerable. Thailand, we are one of the top 10 most vulnerable countries to the adverse impact of climate change, while we have contributed to a very little to cause this crisis. I mean, less than 1%. We only emit 0.8% of the global emission, ladies and gentlemen. But like any other countries, we have been severely attacked by climate change, especially the long-term impacts, such as the increasing average temperature, as well as severity and frequency of floods, droughts, and storms. Such adverse effects jeopardizes major economic sectors, including agriculture, tourism, and industries. It is evident that Thailand has particularly been exposing dramatic oscillation between floods and drought, which has aggravated the water crisis in the country during the last 2 decades. El Niños, La Niñas, El Niños, La Niñas. This year certainly has been the El Niño one. A couple of years from now would certainly be La Niña. I'm sorry, this year is La Niña, and we're going to see El Niños coming back again very soon. And this year we have joined the fate with other countries in experiencing flooding in many areas of the country, including my hometown, Suphanburi. It's not only, it's only about 200 kilometers, 1.5 hours from here. Apart from the rice fields which were damaged, more than 1,700 households were inundated. Moreover, many people living in Bangkok metropolitan area and in the vicinity, which may include some of us here as well, shared the unpleasant destiny of being stuck in the gridlock traffic due to the heavy rainfall and flash floods, first time ever in Thailand. Well, not the traffic part, but the heavy rainfall part, I'm sorry, and the flash floods. The Royal Thai government is certainly aware of the threats of climate change that is not only to the Thai people, but also to mankind and our ecosystem. And we therefore join the global community in fighting against this catastrophe with our promise to ambitiously reach our carbon neutrality by 2050 and net zero GHG by 2065, certainly upon the adequate international support on finance, technology, and capacity building, as announced by our Prime Minister, General Prayut Chan-o-cha, at COP26 on the 1st of November last year in Glasgow. Now, during COP27, Thailand declared that we have walked the talk. We have turned our words into actions. We arrive at COP27 with our revised long-term low-emission development strategy, or LTLEDS, which will certainly pave our way towards the achievement of the determined target. We also have our revised NDC, our nationally determined contribution, aiming to reduce 40% of our emission by 2030, of course, with the international support that I earlier mentioned. Now, both the revised LTLEDS and the NDC reflected the need for the adaptation which is specified in Thailand's climate change master plan, which spans from 2015 until 2050. Now, the strategy on climate change adaptation aims to build climate resilience by integrating policies and measures in all sectors. The National Adaptation Plan, or NAP, which I hope some of you are not taking right now, the NAP, is further elaborated on means to reduce and negate the adverse impact of climate change, which is in line with our long-term national strategy and the Water Resources Management Master Plan, which spanned from 2018 until 2037. Our ministry, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, has also collaborated with the Office of the National Water Resources in stepping up our effort to reinforce the integration of climate change adaptation into the country's water management strategies, particularly at the watershed level. As a regulator and also the operator, our ministry and I work every single day, and alongside, by side with all our partners, with the relevant stakeholders, including other ministries, local authorities, academias, NGOs, medias, as well as the civil societies, to ensure that the country will have a better resilience to climate change. And we do not just hope for it, we are getting on with it. We are getting things done in Thailand. The implementation of several projects varying from early warning system equipped with telemetering and a CCTV across the country, solar-powered water distribution system, large-scale groundwater projects across the country aiming to adequately provide safe and affordable water supply services to local people nationwide, riverbank filtration or RBF in order to serve as autogenerative natural treatment processes, and so on. Ladies and gentlemen, climate change is moving much, much faster than we are, and its speed has provoked a sonic boom SOS across the globe. And I just would like to underscore that adaptation is mandatory, not optional. Ensuring water security in climate crisis, adequate investment, appropriate technology and knowledge development and transfer, as well as capacity building in adaptation is much required. And moreover, the linkage between the adaptation and the mitigation must be considered in managing water resources to deal with climate change, particularly when bridging with energy consumption. Accordingly, there is good merit in adopting a nexus approach to manage the water sector along with energy and other sectors. Breaking down silos and opening out channels for intersectoral communication and coordination is essential. In this regard, I'd like to encourage all of us here to, no matter if you're scientists, researchers, policymakers, or business person, to work closely with civil society to come up with the holistic solutions which will massively scale up the climate action. Ladies and gentlemen, as WSCC conference firstly organized here in Bangkok 6 years ago, the conference today, this afternoon, is not just a conference, but it is a homecoming day which we deserve to celebrate our progress and achievement in addressing the issue. However, there's always a however after a big round of applause. However, there's still a burden, challenges that lies much, much before us that crucially needs to be tackled, particularly in safeguarding the planet and humankind. And I wish that WSCC will continue to be the notable platform for our scientific, technical, and policy-oriented discourses and discussions, which will eventually contribute to ensure that water will be secured for everyone during the climate battle. And I faithfully believe that AIT's 3 major schools, the engineering and technology, environment and management, together with Asia Water Academy and the Center for Global Challenges, which is newly established last year, as well as other relevant organizations gathering here today, this afternoon, will be the robust engine in translating the knowledge into actions. It's time for action, ladies and gentlemen. We have to act now. We have to act differently. But most importantly, we have to act together, because only together impossible can become possible. And as I always end, my keynote is, my keyword is together is possible. And with that, I hereby declare the conference open. Thank you very much, and Akun Chak.
Thank you very much, sir, for your truly insightful and motivating address. May I please request you to remain on stage? We would like to present you with a small souvenir. And for that, I'd like to invite to the stage AIT President, Professor Yamamoto, to please do the honors. Yeah? Thank you very much, sir. We're truly honored to have your participation here. Right. The Honorable Minister has a busy schedule, so he would be leaving in some time, right? But sir, we are very, very glad that you could find the time from your busy schedule to come here. Thank you so much. Okay, moving on in this session, we will now be launching a couple of new initiatives taken at the Asian Institute of Technology in association with partners across the world. First up is the Center for Water and Climate Adaptation, or CWCA. I would like to invite Professor Yamamoto, AIT President, to please provide a brief overview of this center.
So, Excellency, Minister of Natural Resources and Environment, Palawut Silpa, Achet, and I'm very much impressed his talk. And Ambassador of Germany to Thailand, Excellency Georg Schmidt, and Deputy Chief of Mission Minister, Economic Affairs of the Embassy of Japan in Thailand, Mr. Yuichi Oba, Chief of Water Sector Group at ADB, Ms. Nita Oka, and Vice Chairperson of the AIT Board of Trustees, Dr. Subit Kunsubit, Chair of the WSCC 2022 Organizing Committee, Professor Mukan Babel, and distinguished guests and participants. Very good afternoon. It is great pleasure for me today to announce the establishment of a new center at AIT called Center for Water and Climate Adaptation, or CWCA. The previous speakers have already very correctly highlighted the central role of water in any climate response mechanism. In other words, to get our climate story right, we need to get our water story right. The Center for Water and Climate Adaptation at AIT has been set up for precisely this purpose. The broad vision of center is to serve as a catalyst in helping the Asian Pacific region to move up the water security spiral by leveraging on the strengths and expertise of AIT faculty and staff. This is important because already there are growing instances of water shortages, water pollution, flooding, and droughts across the globe in both developed and developing countries. With climate change concerns becoming more alarming, these challenges will become even more serious. In fact, since 2017, the World Economic Forum has consistently placed water risks among the top global risks for humankind every year. Urgent action is needed today to secure our tomorrow. The Center for Water and Climate Adaptation at AIT will look to influence this action through three core trust areas. The first is research to enhance decision support system for countries in their ongoing and planned endeavors for addressing both emerging and anticipated challenges of climate change. The second is capacity building to introduce and train government officials and practitioners in the relevant state-art concept like integrated urban water management, water-sensitive urban management, nature-based solutions, and ecosystem-based adaptation. The third is consultancy to provide hand-holding support to countries to help translate their climate and water aspirations into reality. We realize addressing the challenge of climate change cannot be one organization's role. We are therefore happy to engage with like-minded partners and invite you to be part of this exciting journey ahead. May I now, stop.
Thank you very much, Professor Yamamoto, for introducing the center.
Thank you.
I will now request you, sir, to please launch the center
Okay.
by just pressing that clicker, which Pooja will give you now. Yes.
Counting. 3.
You can just click it, yeah?
Here. It's all right?
Yes.
Okay, 3, 2,
2,
1.
Go.
Start. Okay.
One more, sorry.
This one. Excuse me from this one.
One more. Okay.
Yes, please,
sir.
please.
Open.
One more time, sir. We open the curtain. Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you very much.
for doing the honors. Thank you so much. The second initiative that we are launching today is the Water Security Assessment Tool, or WATSAT, which has been developed by the Asian Institute of Technology, the National Institute of Urban Affairs in India, Thuloy University in Vietnam, the Central University of Rajasthan in India, and Tribhuvan University in Nepal. The purpose of this tool is to serve as a decision support system for city officials and policy makers to make an objective assessment of water security through quantifiable indicators. The digital tool has already been piloted in 3 countries and is now available for use free of charge. I would now like to invite to the stage Ms. Neeta Pokhrel, Chief of the Water Security Group at the Asian Development Bank, to provide her reflections on ADB's work on water security and then launch WATSAT. Ms. Neeta, please.
Khop Ka, thank you for having the Asian Development Bank here. You would be wondering, why is a development banker talking about water security tool? And this morning I was delighted to listen to participants, the keynote speakers, talking about without understanding the water security, you cannot take the systems approach. You cannot take the trade-offs and synergies that requires for a policymaker, for financiers like us, to take the right decision. So thank you again, Your Excellency, Honorable Ministers, distinguished guests. Just very briefly, I would like to explain what we have been doing at the Asian Development Bank to understand the water security situation, national level, at city level, basin level, over the last 20 years in partnership with different universities, think tank, UN partners, and others. This is published in the form of Asia Water Development Outlook, ADO. We have been doing it repeatedly since 2007. And we published in 2020, ADO 2020 series. That is at a national level. And again, the trade-offs and synergies cannot happen when a decision maker who's seeking financing from people like us, or mobilizing internal financing. And financing should always be preceded by science and technology telling you what exactly is your water security at a national level, what exactly is water security, using different key dimensions. We have used 5 key dimensions: urban, rural, economic, environmental, disaster-related risks. Then only you are able to see the need holistically, that you can say, yes, this is what will lead to a sustainable outcome for future. And I need not say more about why it is critical in the current context, because my predecessors have elaborated very, very eloquently. We had one flood incident in Pakistan that wiped out double-digit GDP just recently. and that's just one. All the parameters that we use, I'm also a water supply and sanitation engineer. The factors that we use, 1 in 100, 1 in 10, 1 in 50, will be out the door. We have to take risk-based approach. To take risk-based approach and to come up with new parameters, we have to really have tools in your hand. So I'm delighted to see this another layer of water security tool, which is at a city level. We've looked at national level. We need to look at basin level, city level, because if I take away my banker hat and put my water engineer hat, because I am a water and sanitation engineer. Sanitation has to be used with the same breath, which we forget to use. So if I put this other hat, my water utility in wherever I'm living, I come from a small town on foothills of a mountain in Nepal. What does my local mayor do? What is his entry point? What does he plan differently? What does he implement differently? What does your water utility in Bangkok do differently? Suddenly we're telling water utilities, it's so important, water management is so important, you have to resource yourself differently. Where does he start? Where does she start? So bringing it home, resourcing the water utilities on the ground, resourcing the city mayors with tools, financing, governance structures, so they can start taking action. I think everybody elaborately mentioned, I was also at COP27, water was front and center. For the first time, there was a water thematic day at COP for climate change. And next year we are having our UN conference, so it is the right time to bring these tools home. Now again, just to close, because I know we've had a long day and we've had lunch and none of us have nodded off, especially after the last very inspiring, compassionate speech. What do we do together? We have at ADB, we have recently launched a few initiatives. At COP27, we launched what we call Asia-Pacific Water Resilience Initiative. And it really is to bring home to entities on the ground. We work with 1,000+ water entities. Our current water portfolio is over $20 billion, and it is up to us, up to all of us together to really demystify what this means, because climate action, climate policy agenda has been led by ministries, rightly so, but when it comes to taking action, it's our mayor, it's our water utilities. We work with 300 Purushavas, little municipalities in Bangladesh. What resources will they have, will they need? Because they have to take action now. They can't just wait for the policy conditions to be perfect. It has to go parallelly. So that initiative where we are pooling what we have together to mobilize and bring climate actions, we have pledged that 100 billion of our own financing towards climate action will be achieved by 2030, of which 34 billion will be for adaptation financing. And that must come from water sector. We must rise up to resource these entities on the ground with whatever they need, capacities, financing, governance structures, tools like WhatsApp, make it at the fingertips. Science is there, data is there, but data doesn't become information. You have to match the two. 75 years, Professor Babel said 75 years of coursework here. How do we bring your 75 years of work to my 300 Purushavas in Bangladesh? They're not here. How do we bring those tools home to our entities, 1,000+ in our region in Asia Pacific? So that is what the initiative is about. We have created multiple things. Please do come and listen to us at 3:30. We have a separate session. But in the meantime, I congratulate AIT and partners. The 3 themes you have are very apt. Transitioning from sectoral to nexus need tools and resources. Robustifying climate adaptation strategies need them. Transitioning into action also need them, and we must do it together. I really, really liked what Honorable Minister earlier said. We can only do this when we in a meaningful way, collaborate and move forward. So without further ado, I would like to pledge our support to this. We will pilot it in our cities, and we will work together also with AIT. We are looking forward to it. Now, I don't know which way I'm clicking, this way or that way, that way. Here you go, ta-da. Okay. Pop Kun Ka, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Nita Pokhrel. May I please request you to remain on the stage? We would now like to take a moment to acknowledge our gratitude and appreciation to the dignitaries who have graced the opening session today. May I request Professor Yamamoto to please come to the stage to present the souvenirs. I request Professor Yamamoto to please present a souvenir to Ms. Pokhrel.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Pokhrel, I request you to please continue to stay on the stage for a group picture that we will take in some time. I now request Dr. Suvit Kunkiti to please come to the stage and accept our souvenir. It seems he's not here. So I now request His Excellency, Mr. Yuichi Oba, to please come up and allow us to express our appreciation for your participation. I now request His Excellency, Mr. George Smith, to please come to the stage. Finally, I request Professor Mukund Babil to please come to the stage and present the souvenir to Professor Yamamoto.
Water-saving device.
Yeah.
In Manila.
May I now request the dignitaries to please stage on the pose for a group photo?
Should we just go in front? I think if we can't, why don't we just stand there? We go in front, I think better. Otherwise.
Thank you, everyone.
I hope Germany, Japan go further, together win-win with football.
To conclude the opening session, I would now like to invite Professor Andreas Hastrick to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you. Honorable representatives of the AIT and Asian Development Bank, honorable excellencies from ministry, Thai ministries, which are not here anymore because of time constraints. But anyway, I would like also to express my thanks to them and also to the excellencies of the Japanese and German embassy to Thailand. At this place, and on behalf of the organizing committee of this conference, I would like to express our deep thanks for having accepted to deliver an opening remark today. Thank you very much for the taken time and for being here today together with participants from all over the world. We heard from Professor Babel, we are more than just 300 colleagues and from more than 30 countries. So thank you very much for being here together with all the colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Andreas. We have now concluded with the opening session of today. Let us now move on to a third keynote address for the day, which will be made by Professor Tony Wong from Monash University, Australia. I invite Professor Philip Gorbisville from the China Institute of Water Resources and Hydropower Research to moderate the session.
It's fine. It's fine. Yes. Yes. Excellencies, distinguished guests and participants, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to try to moderate this session. It's a kind of impossible mission we have to do, because we are supposed to give a keynote for almost 30 minutes in 10 minutes. But I'm sure, Tony, you will take over the challenge and do a great job. Just to introduce a little bit the session, we had this morning a very fascinating presentation regarding framework and regarding Nexus. Now we are moving to the cities and the challenge of the cities. So as you know, cities, especially in Asia, are facing great challenges regarding climate change, the need of adaptation, and the request to develop better urban environments. Today, most of our cities are using concepts and approaches that were created in antique Greece 2,000 years ago, and we have to face the challenge today of urban development. And so obviously, vulnerability has increased strongly, and we have to adapt and to answer to those challenges. Professor Tony Wong will try to address in his keynote some of the challenges, especially in the developing countries, the urban development in the developing countries. Professor Wong is Professor of Sustainable Development at Monash University in Australia. So he has worked before during 8 years as Chief Executive of the Cooperative Research Centre, CRC, for water-sensitive cities in Australia. So as being an engineer by training, a specialist for water sectors, being a professor, a researcher, an engineer, a project manager, he has 30 years of professional experience and an extensive knowledge regarding the issues of water with the urban environment. So I would like to ask you, without any delay, to welcome Professor Wong. Professor Wong.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon all. I hate to be the person standing between you and afternoon tea, but I think I might have to just seek your indulgence for a little while to do that as we try to move the screen in front so that I can see the presentation. If you could just bear with me to do this. First of all, thank you very much for your invitation for me to speak here. I was invited to perhaps share my experience over the last perhaps 10 years, especially in the theme of translating knowledge into action. And I assume that this is the result of some significant investment and work undertaken in Australia by the Australian government. Most of you would remember that at the turn of the century, many cities in Australia were subject to significant drought, 13 years of drought. And almost every capital city in Australia, with the exception of Darwin up in the tropical north, had severe water restrictions and was in real trouble in that sense. But what was really interesting was that when the drought broke in 2009, it broke with a vengeance in that every city actually flooded because of that. And it was through that sort of exposure that the Australian government decided to invest in research in urban water management, particularly in relation to how that would influence urban water management. Okay, look, I'm going to run through this very quickly. We heard from the keynote today already, and I don't really need to say much more than making the point that so much of climate impact is manifested in water phenomena. And while some 20 years ago, when there was a lot of discussions and talk about climate mitigation and the role, I guess, of the energy sector to do something, as we move to climate adaptation, it's clearly the time for us in the water sector to take up a leadership role as far as looking at what adaptation initiative we have, simply because so much of climate impact is reflected in the water. Whether directly in terms of drought or floods, or indirectly in terms of urban heat, in terms of food security, water is fundamental to a lot of these issues. And of course, there are many, many frameworks and initiatives that are around. The SDG is one that we've been working with for a while now, and there is real concern with 7 years to go that none of the nations are likely to meet their SDG commitments. And there is a real need for us to actually start to think about how we can increase our effort in trying to achieve many of the SDG goals. But as you can see in this diagram here, and this is something that was developed quite some time ago, how water can actually start to influence so many other SDGs. As you can see here, those that have water management can have a direct impact on other SDGs, and then further on the outer ring, an indirect impact. Our center, the CRC for Water Sensitive City, established by the Australian government in 2012, in fact, did a similar mapping where we basically look at the 169 targets of SDGs and asked the question, if we improve water management, how would it contribute directly or indirectly the targets of the SDGs? And we've worked out that by simply improving water management, we would directly influence 50 of the 169 SDG targets and indirectly influence another 34. So one could say that water actions can permeate through all of the other SDGs, at least through half of those targets. And really, it is on that basis that I like to perhaps share my experience over the last 30 years of my career in terms of how the evolution of interdisciplinary research have evolved at Monash University. I want to be able to share, particularly in the last 10 years at the CRC for Water Sensitive City, whereby by pulling together different disciplines and establishing, designing a program that really understands the weakness in each of the disciplines that influence water management, how they need to come together to deliver the type of solutions that we need. And why that is important, particularly in the urban scene, is that cities and towns are where the convergence of so many challenges come together. And the solutions that we need to develop is actually in influencing the one place. So you cannot actually start to think about looking at the fragmented implementation of different initiatives. You actually need to look at how they all need to come together, because the city and town is just one spatial place that you need to implement the type of work, the kind of adaptation work that integrates all of those different disciplines. So when we were established in 2012, it was a huge program funded by the Australian government. One of the tasks that I had responsibility for is to design the program and bring together the right disciplines to try and develop and integrate their research. The key part of that work, and this is a message that I really want to leave with you, in that it doesn't matter that this was done in Australia. What matters is actually understanding the context and the problem and bringing the different disciplines together into the integrative platform that we need to create. In so doing, the design of the program is very much about understanding the dynamics of different disciplines and how they interact in shaping a city and influencing the resilience and the capacity of the city. And this was what it is. And what I like to do is simply share with you some of the outcomes from the work and perhaps reflect on that in terms of how that may be relevant to other parts of the world. I'll start with the notion of a piece of work that we did, which was actually led by the Faculty of Business and Economics at Monash University, Professor Lata Gangaharan, who basically looked at economic theory and simply asked a question at that time: in the city of Melbourne, with the water resources it has, how secure is that from an economic modeling perspective? And the question really was that if you were an investor in the stock market, how would you diversify your investments? They did an analysis and in fact came up with the solution for Melbourne. It's unique to Melbourne. Every city will have its own unique characteristics. That the best portfolio, the best mix of portfolio was to really simply have, I think, 70% of its water from traditional sources based on dams and catchments, which is what Melbourne was serviced with at that point in time. 20% of that really needs to come from alternative sources such as recycled wastewater and stormwater. And another 10% of that was to come from desalinated water. That was their conclusion in terms of doing their economic gaming that they normally would do in a stock market situation to come to that conclusion. It was that notion that we really need to then recognize that in fact our cities are water supply catchments, and that the rainwater that falls in our city are in fact water resources, and that the wastewater that's generated from this are resources that needs to be harnessed. It was through that the government started to think about how do we move our cities to diversify its portfolio of water sources. Another piece of research that was undertaken in the CRC in parallel to that was of course by our law faculty. And what Professor Graham Hodge did was basically to look at existing legislation, existing governance arrangement, and ask the question, are there impediments to the harvesting of stormwater in cities, to the reuse of wastewater? And the reality, and I think this is quite common in many other parts of the world, is that quite often the regulations are silent in terms of whether you would use stormwater as a resource or recycle wastewater. So in some sense, their recommendation was that it is not illegal, it's just that it is not conventional practice. And it actually sets us to start to think about how do we foster change within that kind of framework. That was a bit of research that was undertaken through our academics in the law faculty, but also to actually start to ask the question on what type of reform would be needed to actually embed into our institutional arrangement the whole notion of diversifying our water sources. Another project that was going on in the CRC at the time was really the question of if we were going to harvest stormwater, we should get a better understanding of the relationship between land use and the quality of that stormwater. And that was undertaken by Dr. Wolfgang Gernyard from the University of Queensland, part of the CRC. Is a chemical engineer that basically undertook a research to look at how different land use and the activities actually influence the quality of stormwater that is run off. Of course, with the notion that if we were going to harvest stormwater, we want to choose the best possible catchment or subcatchment to be harvesting in the first place. And of course, that led to the development of guidelines in terms of how you would select the stormwater, what you would do with the water that comes through. Another project that was part of the CRC in this huge program, which involves 35 projects, by the way, was another project that actually undertaken by Professor Anna Delatic that actually looks at nature-based solutions and green biofilters on the basis that if we wanted to harvest stormwater, we better start to introduce and embed into our urban landscape nature-based solutions to cleanse that stormwater before we would harvest it. And there was a lot of guidelines and field studies that was undertaken to lead to a lot of this. Now, I'll come to the reason of why all of these seemingly disparate projects actually would come together to deliver the type of reform that you need. And that's really the message that I want to leave with you. But I just want to get off this for a little while and talk a little bit about nature-based solutions. It is now becoming really popular. It's been discussed. But I just want to remind all of you, especially those that have been undertaking research in this arena for the last 20 years, that from a technology and understanding perspective, we have been doing this type of work for a long time. Ecologists have been looking at the value of ecosystem services for a long time. But the beauty of it being recognized here, particularly with the publication in 2018 by the UNESCO in terms of nature-based solution, is that there is now a recognition that nature-based solutions are part of the green infrastructure and fabric of our society. The notion of recognizing nature-based solutions as infrastructure actually meant that they are now assets. They are assets in corporations, and they are actually featuring in financial bottom lines in those corporations. And because they are assets, they deserve to have budget set aside for their operation and maintenance. And because they are assets providing services, they actually require some level of a rate base or an investment, because communities are actually benefiting from those services. One of the things that I'd like to highlight here is that, of course, in the preamble to this report, there was the recognition that nature-based solutions are actually going to have to be part of our solution. The commencement of us thinking about hybrid infrastructure in our urban environments. Another extract from the executive summary talk about nature-based solutions and innovations that embeds the perspective of ecosystem services into our urban infrastructure, into our urban form. And of course, another extract here talks about how urban green infrastructure, including green buildings, is an emerging phenomenon. That's sort of what we've been working on, to actually look at how cities start to embed the type of ecosystem services in nature-based solutions. But I want to remind all of you that there is progressively, I hear in my travel, the misconception that nature-based solution can solve everything. And I think that there's a real danger that those of us practicing in nature-based solutions would be left holding the baby when 2030 comes along and we do not meet our targets. What is really important for us to understand is that nature-based solution is part of the total solution, especially if we use it to deliver hybrid infrastructure. And this is where the concept of green and gray infrastructure come into place. It doesn't remove gray infrastructure, but what it does is to provide a level of robustness and flexibility and resilience to the operation of our traditional gray infrastructure. I'd just like to expand that a little bit, especially for those of you that have been working in this arena for a long time, in terms of my take on what nature-based solution is all about. This is another diagram from the same report, and I wanted to make the point that the delivery of nature-based solutions actually draw expertise and scientific knowledge from many different fields. For instance, from nature conservations and restorations, especially if you are looking at building huge natural capital through reforestation, protection of natural wetlands in large sort of rural environment, that the science that you draw from is actually conservation ecology, and of course, to some degree, land rehabilitation, restoration. I stress the term restoration here in terms of restoring degraded landscape back to its pristine environment. As we move closer and closer to an urban environment whereby land use changes have really impacted the area, and there is actually not a lot of options, but to actually start to think about how you would rehabilitate degraded waterways to perhaps create a new equilibrium that allows the coexistence of natural environment with the changed land use, whether it be agriculture or urbanization. We cannot ignore that. And through that, a lot of the science and techniques that we use are based on restoration, and more importantly, rehabilitation. And I stress the difference between terminology between restoration and rehabilitation on the basis that rehabilitation is actually to repair the natural environment and at the same time take it to perhaps a new equilibrium that coexists better with the changed land use of that catchment. And of course, as we get closer into the city, we're actually moving from restoration, rehabilitation into the arena of looking at biomimicry, how we can embed a lot of those natural systems now into the urban form. And I'll give you some examples in here. For instance, the notion of removing concrete channels and renaturalizing it. And the pictures you see there is, of course, the most recent project in Singapore, looking at Bishan Park, the conversion of the Kallang Canal, I suppose, into a natural waterway. But in that process, you find that you can actually start to introduce along some of the bank's other nature-based solutions that are now there to provide cleansing of stormwater to protect the receiving water in that naturalized waterway. I often refer to them as kidneys in our cities that are basically there to ensure that the stormwater runoff are actually cleansed before it's discharged into that. We have expanded the notion of those nature-based, actually taking it back to communities that are not well serviced by sanitation to be now part of a nature-based sanitation solution. You can also start to think about how future streets can be configured. If I can move to that, future streets can be configured along open space and gardens to actually start to introduce many more of those systems. You can look at streets, as you can see in here, and of course in buildings as well. So all of them are different levels of biomimicry that captures the essence of the natural processes, the ecosystem services, but configure it in a way through landscape architecture and building architecture to fit into the urban form. And the message I have here is that the introduction of hybrid infrastructure into our cities need to go hand in hand with spatial planning and building regulations. Let's come back to this research program that's been running for the last 10 years. Another team within the CRC, which was our climate team, was actually researching on looking at what urban design form and different systems in a city will start to influence the microclimate of the city in anticipation of significant more heat wave days. And of course, this is important not so much from a water perspective, but water, nevertheless, is fundamental to maintaining the type of greening of cities that actually introduce microclimate enhancements. In less humid environments, which is where Melbourne was, I'd say the whole notion of evaporative cooling by vegetation actually have a significant influence on climate as well, on the microclimate. And of course, through that work, I come back to another team, this time Professor David Pennell from the University of Western Australia, which was part of our team, to actually start to ask the question of how do you value nature-based solutions? How do you actually put an economic value to it? And how do you, through the process of putting economic value, understands the diversity, the spectrum of benefits and the beneficial outcomes from it? Because if we cannot provide an economic value to those nature-based systems, it's very difficult to foster the type of investments that we need to introduce a lot of these systems. Out of that work, there was a proposition to basically try and change government decisions from a financial-based valuation system to an economic-based benefit cost assessment. Economic in terms of actually looking at tangible and non-tangible economic value, looking at willingness to pay, and looking at broader community benefits of green infrastructure. I'm going to run through this very quickly. Another team from the University of Melbourne starts to look at how all of this could influence the health of waterway and bringing greater diversity back into our urban landscapes. All of that is captured, all of that information is captured through a series of modeling platforms and predictions and tools that you can see through here in terms of how the interaction of different systems are being modeled from a water quality perspective, from an urban heat perspective, from the role of trees and different configurations in architecture. All of that is modeled to actually understand the type of impact it has, both in water quality, water resources, urban heat, and so on and so forth. And of course, I want to make the point that translation of knowledge into action has also got to come from demonstration. Many of our political leaders and communities often require us to demonstrate what some of this integrated technology would look like, what the benefits are, and the monitoring and evaluation that goes with it. And of course, ultimately, how do they come together to help local government develop their business plan in terms of design, in terms of performance, in terms of economic valuation, to enable local government to actually start to pull this together. And I guess the message I leave with you is that the innovation in a lot of the work we do as we strive to talk about holistic management and integrated management, the innovation is actually about how we connect the dots, how we harness the knowledge and the skills from everywhere and contextualize it and adapt that to the context that we are dealing with. This knowledge and this proof of concept, which may come from an Australian context, are now being adapted in the Mekong Basin, looking at the social context there, looking at the climate, and also looking at what is really critical for their particular need for resilience and robustness. So embracing the inherent complexity and the interconnectedness is really key to how we connect the dots. So in summary then, how do we strengthen climate change adaptation strategies in cities in developing countries, and how do we design our program to enable interdisciplinary input into delivering the type of climate change adaptation capacity? I'll leave you with the notion, the message that the SDGs are all connected, and to ignore that connection would actually ultimately lead to a lot of misinvestment and also our inability to actually harness the full potential of all of the disciplines that come together. But I also make the point that in cities, all the challenges that the cities are is a great convergence of many of the challenges of the SDGs. And in fact, they not only converge, they magnify the impact of those challenges. Another point I'd like to make here is that climate resilience is in fact a social technical endeavor. Technology alone will not address that. It should go hand in hand with how policies, community participations and community behavior need to go hand in hand with the investments in infrastructure that needs to come. So what are some of the actions that we need to think about? First and foremost, as I make the point, we need to embrace the inherent complexity and the interconnectedness of urban social technical systems. The legislations, the institutional arrangements, the governance, how that is connected with the infrastructure investment, not just in water, but across all of those services. And that means that we need to embrace that complexity through interdisciplinary research and demonstration. We do need to demonstrate that. And we need to foster and engage with industry across sector to promote co-investment and co-operation of urban infrastructure. And to do that, the economic valuation of the multiple benefits becomes really important, because through the economic valuation, we would understand the beneficiaries across all the different sectors, which then becomes the framework for co-investments into those multifunctional hybrid infrastructure. The second action plan here is to introduce multifunctional hybrid infrastructure. I've described one which is a blue and green, but there are a whole wide range of other multifunctional infrastructures. If you look at a lot of our systems, there are real opportunities for us to think about the type of range of ecosystem services that can be delivered. We need to foster cross-sectorial co-investments and co-governance. I think I've already mentioned that. And of course, underpinning that is a strong, robust economic valuation model, which is basically my fifth point here. Another one is, of course, to link infrastructure planning with spatial planning. I already talked about that because that then provides the foundation for the progressive transformation of a city as it undergoes its renewal cycle. And finally, the embracement of a much broader economic valuation model instead of the current financial benefit cost analysis model to evaluate projects. So I apologize for running through this very quickly. I hope that you are able to get some of the key messages that I've left here with you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for this very meaningful presentation. We have a quick time for few questions, urgent ones, before you rush to the coffee break. I have the feeling that, yes. In a loud way, please.
Diversifying this portfolio of water sources in the urban context for water supply. Now, how much evidence do we have, especially from the developing country context, that this really works in economic terms? For instance, you talked about this rainwater harvesting systems. You know, many countries have been doing this, especially India, Bangladesh, Nepal. They have been investing a lot of money for this rooftop rainwater harvesting systems. What you find is that it is very, very expensive if you talk about cost per cubic meter of water that is supplied. So it's, if you compare it with the cost of conventional systems, it works out to be quite expensive. Number two, you know, coming to stormwater management. Now, you know, in many developing countries, the stormwater is heavily contaminated. And the cost of enforcing regulations to make that water clean in the urban settings is quite difficult, if not economically prohibitively expensive in economic terms. So, so if you look at the real cost of doing these interventions to get good quality water from the, from a city, in an urban catchment, it's going to be very, very expensive. So what's the real trade-off? You talked about ecological benefits, but then who pays for that? Yes, there are ecological benefits, but then who pays for it in a developing country context? Thank you so much, and sorry for being too long.
Thank you. No, thank you for that. Look, it's a really good question, and I acknowledge that the whole concept of a portfolio of water sources comes with the notion of fit-for-purpose use of water. And if you look at the traditional water supply systems at the moment, you have water that is treated to drinking standard for everything. You have drinking water going to be flushing toilets. And so when we actually start to think about the fit-for-purpose use of water and closing some of the loops in terms of where water is harvested for local use, you find that the economic analysis do stack up. What happens when you say it's very expensive is usually the notion that you are expecting one source of water to meet a wide range of demands. And that was how Australia was too, until they realized that they have to build a desalination plant and then start to cost the water against that. In India, we're now saying that there's building dams outside of your state to deliver water through long distances into your city. And I would argue that you look into your own city in the first place to see what water resources are in the city to actually take the pressure off the drinking water supply. Because, I would put it to you that 70% of your water consumption do not require water to be treated to the drinking standard, and yet we do. So I'll just leave it with that in the sense that that argument was with us for a long time until we realized the cost of resilience and the incremental cost to lift our resilience, and that was about desalination and long transfer of water from dams outside our jurisdiction. So that was what actually changed government policy in that sense. In terms of water quality, absolutely, if your stormwater is polluted, first of all, if you don't make an attempt to clean it and manage it as a resource, it's the environment and the pollution and the way people live around those environments that will actually pay the price for it.
Thank you for the accurate answer, but I think we will have to stop because otherwise everyone will complain about the coffee break and for the next session. Once again, thank you very much for your talk. You will be available, I'm sure, for the rest of the session for the question. You do it now?
Thank you very much, Professor Tony Wong and Professor Philip, for the wonderful session. I would now like to request Professor Philip to please deliver the souvenir to Professor Tony Wong. We will now have a short coffee break for 10 minutes only, after which we will have a series of parallel sessions which you can see on the screen. May I please remind you the coffee break will be for 10 minutes only, so please proceed to the sessions on time. We will reconvene in this room at 7 p.m. for the gala dinner. We have an exciting cultural program lined up for you which I'm sure you will enjoy. And just a reminder to wear your WSCC 2022 t-shirts during the gala dinner. Thank you.